A little while ago at auction, I was able to buy a pair of Serena Williams custom Nike Flares, the player exclusives that Nike made specifically for her, and the ones that she physically wore on court. What I find fascinating is that these shoes, number one, have the same inner tooling as the ones she'll be using at Wimbledon this year, with just a few tweaks, which we'll get to later, but also just how different these are from the stock Nike Flare, which is Serena Williams' signature shoe. But when it comes to player exclusives, or the shoes that these companies make specifically for their top athletes, the creativity and the customization is just endless, because these players are able to use the entire resources of a huge company like Nike to put exactly what they want in the shoe. And sometimes these shoes can get pretty creative and pretty granular in terms of the customization. So let's cut these things open and see what's inside one of the greatest players of all time's custom shoes. Here we go. Now, some of the coolest sneakerhead stuff can be found on the inside of the uppers here. As you can see like the warning labels under here with the sample, as well as a lot of the product numbers, as well as the customization numbers where it actually shows SW. It also has the custom last number and kind of just all the details Nike uses with her custom last measurements that they use in the system to produce the shoe. But aside from the Easter eggs hiding underneath the uppers, getting into the actual performance characteristics of them, it honestly is even more interesting to me. Now, this is a 2-layer upper, but the inner layer of the upper is this elastic fabric that goes into a high top. Now, that high top has these little beadings on the inside, and even though these high tops don't really produce any stability because it is elastic, it does produce a lot of biofeedback, and it actually does secure the shoe to your ankle, and that makes it feel more like a second skin, especially in a more minimalist shoe like Serena's. And even though that high top doesn't produce any stability, when that shoe is giving you a lot more biofeedback, your brain then can tell where your foot is in space, and that creates better tactile feedback from the nerves in your ankle and foot up to your brain, which allows your body to be more stable. So even though it doesn't produce mechanical stability, it can up here. But what I find most interesting about the uppers of Serena's customs versus the stock Nike Flares that, the ones that you can buy at the store, is that the ones on Serena's shoes have no stabilizing elements on the outer layer of the uppers. They have no reinforcement, no nothing. Whereas on the stock model of her signature shoe, there's reinforcing elements here and there. There's rubberized elements there. It really makes the shoe a lot more secure around your foot. However, Serena Williams has such strong lower leg and foot muscles that she doesn't really need any of that. So they can save weight in the shoe in the uppers because she's already bringing all that strength and stability to the table, and maybe put some more weight other places in the shoe that she would need it. And speaking of that upper strength, if you look at the upper durability test, the Dremel 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, on the stock model, there's a rubber ring reinforcing the toe box here. The Dremel doesn't really bite through that whatsoever. However, on Serena's, it's just a really thin toe cap guard, just enough to stop her from burning through her toes on the court if she's going to toe drag or slide. However, the Dremel just bites right through this because these uppers are only meant to be used for a couple weeks at a time versus on a shoe you have to make for the public, which have to last a little longer. And that durability test highlights really the only major difference between these PEs of Serena's and the ones that she'll be using at Wimbledon, and that all comes down to the upper materials. Because if you look at Serena's Instagram feed, you'll see the shoes that she's wearing at Wimbledon do have stronger uppers than these PEs right here, which are meant for more hard courts. And a strong upper on a shoe is really crucial for grass because of how unpredictable the grip is under your foot. Because a lot of times you can't produce enough friction on a grass court to get enough traction and to have your foot muscles engage and your leg muscles engage. So a lot of times on grass, because it is so slick and because there's different dry spots and wet spots, your shoe does have to do a little bit more work for you versus on something like a hard court or all court player exclusive shoe where you don't really need all of that. And getting into the midsole teardown, these were some of the easiest shoes I've ever cut open until the very end where they were one of the hardest. And that's because they have an enormous carbon fiber shank that's bottom loaded into this shoe, and it was just really hard to cut through. And what looks like just an afterthought here on the insole is actually one of the more telling parts of Serena's shoe, because if you look at Serena's shoe, it is just a standard insole. However, when you look at the stock Nike Flare, they advertise Serena Williams' signature shoe as having a drop-in midsole. However, Serena's shoe doesn't. her custom ones have no drop-in. Now on Serena's shoe, they have a much thicker Cushlon foam that goes all the way from heel to toe, which is actually on top of the Strobel board. So this is technically Cushlon Strobel, which is pretty interesting. Underneath of that is Phylon, however, that just goes right to the midfoot. However, in the forefoot, it is just Cushlon, so there really is no stack. Now underneath of that, that super long carbon fiber shank is not found in the stock version of her signature shoe. It is a much shorter shank, and that's because carbon fiber shanks are really uncomfortable. But Serena Williams needs that much longer shank because her demands are just that much greater than the average player. The problem with that setup is if this were just put in a standard shoe, it would just become so uncomfortable over time. But because like a lot of other top athletes, Serena has custom orthotics she puts in the shoe that really kind of shields that carbon fiber, so she can wear something like this, which is super minimalist, and make up for it with a custom insert in there, and then these shoes become almost like an extension of her leg. And getting into the outsole tread, of course, anything on grass is just going to have nubs on it. It's going to be pretty standard across the board. However, in her all-court setup, she actually prefers this more geometric, almost hexagonal pattern on her shoes. However, on the stock model of her signatures, it's just more of this quasi herringbone. What I find interesting is, I mean, I like herringbone, and I think this just really comes down to player preference. You know, she just likes the grip of this more hexagon pattern, whereas somebody else is gonna like more herringbone. However, the more interesting part of this setup is what goes on here on the arch. Now, if you see this little foam arch setup here in her shoe, which doesn't really look like much. However, on her shoes, the arch, that foam there, is actually much broader and wider and a little bit more supportive when you put it on. And I find that interesting because usually, I mean, I just think that this stuff here, a lot of times is just window dressing on a shoe. However, Nike and Serena thought enough of it to put more of it in her shoe. So when you see these shoes that have this little bit of dressing here on the inside or outside of the shoe, a lot of times it's actually doing something for people. The other interesting thing about the outsoles of Serena's versus the stock is that the durometer was higher on her rubber, and its resistance to abrasion on the outsole durability test with the Dremel 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper was also a little bit better than the stock version of the shoe, and I kind of thought that would be the opposite. I'd think you'd have softer rubber for better grip. However, in Serena Williams footwork, she likes to slide a little bit more into her shots, so I think they probably outfit her with some rubber that can withstand that, and also maybe some that has a little bit more give in there for her, therefore she can slide into those shots. And getting into the fit of Serena's Nike Flares, this was actually pretty ironic, is that her and I have almost the same foot. These fit me really well. I felt really good in them. However, in the stock model, they were cramping my foot in the same size like crazy. So the last in these is custom to Serena. You can actually see here in the forefoot, her forefoot is much wider than the stock version of the shoe. And the lateral flange on Serena's shoe is much wider, a little more aggressive and serrated. So you can tell these shoes are meant for just incredibly aggressive movement, incredibly aggressive grip, and kind of more side to side speed. And so just the tooling of the shoe reflects that, a little bit wider heel, wider midfoot, wider forefoot, and yeah, that's just the shape of her foot. But also, when you get a shoe like this, you can tell it's meant for more low to the ground feel and low to the ground movement. You can also tell just by the stack in the midsole, it's super low. I mean, her forefoot is on the ground, and so these shoes are meant to feel the ground, to be able to have all that tactile and that great sensation, but also because, you know, that Strobel board is really thick and it has enough room for an insert, you know, enough for that you can wear them comfortably for a few weeks at a time as well. And so if you're watching a basketball game or tennis match and notice that the shoe that your favorite player is wearing is not the same one that they're endorsing, it doesn't necessarily mean that their signature shoe or the stock version of the shoe is bad. It just means that maybe they're just used to a certain setup, or that they just want one little thing in a shoe that maybe isn't good for mass production, or maybe makes the shoe unplayable over a long period of time, or makes it really not durable, or there might just be something in that shoe that just isn't great for the general public. So it doesn't mean that those companies are holding out. It just means that that shoe just might not be great for you or me, just might be good for the one person that's wearing it. And speaking of some of those athletes that are endorsing shoes that they might not be wearing on court, if you want to take a deeper dive into some other player exclusive shoes on this channel, make sure you click into this playlist up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam and upper materials. I'll see you in the next video.